Also, I don't know how relevant it is or if I'm even gonna include this, but even my toothbrush is digital. You probably remember me. I'm Naomi Levine. I'm one of those comm students that was in your class this semester. First off, thank you for having me in your class. I had a really wonderful time. For this final project, as I had shared with you and got an approval before doing so, I wanted to make a vlog-style video exploration of my relationship to technology as we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic in spring semester 2020. My overall reasoning for choosing to do a vlog style video was simply because day to day, hour to hour was blurring together, and trying to remember to constantly be writing down notes just wasn't going to work with the workflow that I had. And I really wanted to have a more, at the moment, intuitive way to be able to capture what was going on in my space around me and be able to capture my thoughts and my notes. So in many ways, a lot of the footage that I sifted through from an entire week's worth of video filming was a lot of field notes. And what I've done is I've edited down the massive hoard of content that I have saved on my computer right now, and just hours of filming that I did in an entire week into this specific context that we were looking at in this class, which was human relationships and technology and other broadly related things. I think that the vlogging style also allows for me to be able to show a relationship that I think is really important, that would be a lot harder to explain in a paper or would have been a lot harder to explain in some other medium, which is how I use space as part of my technology context. In all of the readings that we did, and in particular the first book that we had read, it talked a lot about contextualizing the relationship that individuals, and in particular individuals who were persons of color, I believe was in particular focusing on Black women who were in lower income jobs, and their relationship to technology, and thinking about not so much that it's a technology gap in the sense of limited access or limited knowledge, but it was just there's so much context around technology everywhere from being swindled in the governmental system with DSHS, or I don't know what you call it here in the state of Indiana, the Department of Human Health and Services, or having to deal with it at their jobs, to having to interact with it because they have different phone calls from different service providers that they have to be navigating throughout the day, thinking about call center jobs, thinking about cashiering, thinking about other sort of entry-level positions that involve a lot of using rudimentary computers, and it's a very adversarial relationship. And while we were discussing that, I was thinking from a previous and still highly relevant to me framework of considering social situations through space, as early on in my career, one of the many areas that I chose to study and was interested in pursuing further and still am interested in continuing to pursue is more archaeological. And in archaeology, the idea that when you look at a particular site as it's laid out, the relationships between where certain artifacts are found, where certain structures are unearthed, and where different things are positioned to one another can tell people a lot using different archaeological theory and interpretation and methodologies about power relationships, about work-life balance, and a whole slew of possible interpretations of what could have been happening at that site. What can we know about human culture through the physical representation of it in the archaeological record? So that's something that I was percolating on as we continued having our discussions over the many weeks, and it really made me think about how when I moved into the house that I'm in now, chose to lay out where my different aspects of my life are. My partner and I moved in with our 2 roommates this summer amid the pandemic. We moved in starting around mid-July and mostly got settled by sometime in like September. We still have renovations and things to make, but that's getting done. And we had some choices to make about where we wanted to put things, how we wanted to interact with the spaces. We already knew that I was going to be fully online. We hadn't gotten it confirmed where our roommates were going to be doing most of their work and teaching. My partner was going to be fully online as he was on a research appointment and taking a class that was online. So we knew that there was going to be a lot of work happening out of our house, in addition to the normal amount of doing a lot of work out of our house that we already had anticipated pre-pandemic when we were making the plans to move in together, all 4 of us, as all 4 of us are graduate students who end up working from home, because that's part of how our jobs end up getting treated in the workplace, which results in us doing a lot of work out of our homes anyways. When the pandemic first started, I didn't think it was going to be a significant difference for me working at home all the time. I thought, well, I mean, okay, so then I just won't spend the few hours that I spend on campus working, I'll just spend them at home. And it turns out that it's a big difference. It's meant a lot that I've had to change and shape about the way that my home is, and the power between myself and my employer as I struggle to find a good balance between different types of labor that I perform throughout the day, from recreational labor to leisure to professional paid labor to domestic labor, and all of that is now all in one location, and it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with, and as you'll see, I'll continue talking about that in other parts of this video as it unfolds. To talk a bit about the structure of the video overall, I chose to organize the video rather than by chronological time, because otherwise this video would have been 4+ hours long, and I didn't want to do that to either of us. I chose to organize it by space. So there are 3 major spaces in my home that I interact with technology, in particular digital technologies that we commonly think about, not so much technologies in the more archaeological sense where literally everything is a technology, but areas where I perform different types of technological based work, and those areas are my office, which is upstairs from here, in fact directly above where I'm filming right now, which is in my bedroom. Following that, I then have a discussion about how I use my garage space and the way that it's set up with different types of technologies as a really kind of complicated mixed space that I use. And then finally I'll be talking about actually this space down here, which is my bedroom, as well as throughout my basement. My partner and I are in the basement of the house, and that changes a bit of the dynamic of how I relate from stuff that I do down here interacting with technology as compared to what I do upstairs and even out in the garage. So without further ado, let's start talking about my office space. Hey, here's a tour of my computer setup. So this is my main computer setup. It's 3 monitors, and it's just a desktop. It was my mom's old computer that she ended up not needing, because for the type of work that she does, she's an occupational therapy assistant, and so she doesn't really got to bring work home with her. But yeah, so this monitor over here is the one that my mom had with the desktop that she sent over. This particular monitor that's rotated vertically is one that I had bought at Surplus back when I was using a laptop and I wanted a second screen. And then this monitor is actually my partner's monitor that he didn't need because he changed his computer setup about a year ago, and so he didn't need this monitor. So I'm using this monitor for my computer setup because I actually do make use of all 3 screens. And you know, when I'm in class, there's the webcam. That's where I'm at. So usually on this screen over here, which I actually in my system have labeled as 1. So mine is 1, 2, and then 3. So I do right to left. So on monitor 1 is usually whenever I'm in a class, I have my Zoom set up there. On the center monitor, on monitor 2, I usually have pulled up either assignments, or I'll have like web pages pulled up of things that people will post links for in class. And then usually on the 3rd monitor, right now I have a YouTube video up on it, but usually in class what I have on the 3rd monitor is either I'll have paused whatever video I was watching before class, I'll have like my file explorer up, I'll have other sort of file information or just other like notes and stuff up on that monitor, and I'll have Discord open up on the 3rd monitor here. So that's like my main computer setup. I've got a wireless sort of standard QWERTY keyboard. I've thought about switching to the ergonomic one. I initially learned how to type on an ergonomic keyboard when I was a kid, and then just stopped having one in my life. And then this is my mouse. It's a standard just trackball mouse. I've noticed nowadays that trackball mice, in particular wireless ones, because I've thought about switching to a wireless trackball mouse, but most of them have it to where you've got the 2 sort of clicking keys over up here, and then you use the trackball with your thumb. And we have one of those around in our various like technology cupboards, but I don't really like it. I don't like working with my thumb in that way because it really cramps up the rest of my hand. So I'd rather have these and then moving around like this. It does make playing games like Portal basically impossible because there's no scroll wheel on it, and that's a pretty key feature for playing games like Portal and Portal 2, which is why I have not finished Portal 2, because about the time that I switched over to this computer setup and this mouse, I was on the last boss fight of Portal 2, and I've just not gone back to finishing it because I haven't hooked up another mouse. I don't know, maybe I'll finish Portal 2 someday. And then the headphones that I use are these Sony professional ones. They're pretty good headphones. They're, you know, wired. I have them set up with my speaker system, which I'll show off in a moment. I got these as a gift from my partner one year for, I think it was a Christmas gift, maybe a birthday gift, because he had the same headphones, and they're really nice. They work really great for doing things like film editing and audio editing, and just makes it a lot easier for me to put on some music on Spotify and zone out whenever I'm working. And then for my audio setup in this computer room, I've got a pair of speakers. There's this one on this side and then the other one behind my third monitor over there. And I've got the headphones plugged into it. I'd initially had it just plugged into the desktop itself, but I found that if I switched the headphones to being plugged into the monitor, or into the speaker rather than the actual computer itself, I found that it reduced the problem of, like, if I was on a Skype call with somebody, because I have one of my meetings that's done through Skype, it reduced the notification sounds coming out of my speakers, because Skype is weird. Also, you may have noticed that, yes, on my desk is a Cool Baby, which is, you know, a sort of third-party manufactured NES classic, like basically mini computer simulator. And that is actually hooked up to this monitor here, because this monitor had another HDMI port that I could hook it up to. And so sometimes if I'm you know, doing a long haul on a paper, what I'll do is I'll throw this monitor into the other setting mode, and I will throw on a game on the Cool Baby, usually Adventure Island, because I've been trying to get better at that game. That's been a battle of mine since childhood. And then I'll have my essay up here on the center screen that I'm working on, and then I'll use the third monitor for my references, like any sort of citation stuff that I'm pulling from to make it easier to transfer the information over, and that sort of thing. But yeah, and then mic-wise, I'm sure you've noticed I have a Blue Yeti mic, the classic Snowball mic. It's not the best mic, and I certainly could have bought a different mic, but I purposefully bought this particular mic because it was one of the first mics that I used for doing voiceover work when I first learned film editing in my high school video production class. And ever since then, I have desperately wanted this microphone, and despite never really having a proper use for it, I've loved this microphone for too long, so I ended up buying it. Maybe not the best reasoning behind buying a microphone, but it's what I did. And then my desk actually is also an important part of this. So you may have recalled, but it's fine if you don't, that sometimes in our class meetings I'll actually be standing up, and my things will be at a different level, and that's because I have a sit-stand desk. Weirdly enough, I was looking to get a sit-stand desk prior to the pandemic. I was just waiting to move, but yeah, now I have one. And I really like it. It's been really beneficial. I have a couple of presets here. Currently my desk is all the way down because I am short and I'm sitting. Option 2 is my next most commonly used one. You can see a common pattern here of me doing things right to left for some reason. I've just always been attracted to doing that. But that's for if I'm just wanting to stand and work. And then option 1 here on the preset, which is my my third most common use setting, is actually for if I want to stand but I'm not planning to do any like intensive work, but I want to stand and I want to use my sit-stand board. So it's a balance board. And it's just an Amazon Basics one. And it's really great for being able to get some stretching in at my desk. I really like it. It's got some like grip tape on here that's pretty much just like a really coarse grained sandpaper, to be honest. But yeah, it works really great. I like it. I don't use it maybe as often as I should, but it has been great for some like long like Python coding sessions that I've had to do recently. But yeah, and then also under my desk there is this footstool pillow thing that I fell in love with while shopping at Payless one time, and I just had to buy it. I call him Dillo, which is short for dog pillow. And I use him as a footrest when I'm sitting on my desk. But yeah. So I guess that's my main computer setup. It's, you know, nothing too exciting. It's not the only setup that I use. Throughout the week I'll show you some of the other setups that I interact with. But this is really my main work setup. And despite the fact that I said that I was gonna start working at the end of my major clip, I definitely did not. As you noticed, I sat down in front of my entertainment system downstairs and watched John Oliver with my partner, and then I came upstairs, reheated some leftover chili, and I've been watching YouTube videos. So it's a Monday. Mondays are hard even in a pandemic. I don't remember, you know, often what day of the week it is, but I always know when it's a Monday, because I think I might just be Garfield the cat at heart. But Fridays, I have 3 hours of office hours. They started at noon, which was about an hour and a half ago at this point, and they go until 3. I just put them as one big old block on Fridays, because then I've got lots of time to do work at my own pace, and all that. So you can see how I'm making use of my 3 monitors so far, with YouTube being open over here. I was taking a bit of a break prior to this to look at some videos that are in my subscriptions. And then I was also listening to and enjoying just, I think they were calling it chill music, some lo-fi hip-hop with jellyfish from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I highly recommend it. It's some great videos and content. I enjoy it. Just, you know, some chill jellyfish moving about while you're listening to some good music. And then, let's see, over here on my center monitor I've got the classes on my Brightspace open. You know, just some of the stuff that I've been working on. I got some grading I need to work on today. And then over here is actually on my number 1 listed monitor, which is usually the monitor that I do my Zoom calls from, but actually I have open a PowerPoint presentation which has these informational office hours sort of slides that tells people, you know, oh hey, I'm, you know, in my office hours, and the screen is shared. Also, I just have my participants list over there so that I know when somebody comes in, because I turned off the waiting room so that when they come in they just see this. My audio is on but my camera is off, and so they see this sign and they know, oh hey, my camera is off, but you know, speak up and let me know that you're here. And then if I step away from my desk, I could be grabbing lunch and they know to hang out, grabbing some coffee, they know it'll be a shorter period of time that I'm out, going to the bathroom, so, you know. And then this one was a different one that I had for for a Thursday, whenever my students were coming in to do their discussion, and I had stepped out for a bit, so. And also I was playing video games. So anyways, those are some of my sign options for doing Zoom that I have, and I just keep this screen shared on. And you may know from using PowerPoint, I don't know how much you use PowerPoint, but usually whenever you set up a PowerPoint like this to go and to present and you have multiple monitors, it'll then on a different monitor have the presenter view, and you can just turn off the presenter view when you're doing that. And then if you hide the presenter view, just have the presentation on one, and in my case then I still have 2 monitors to work from, which is really nice. Both my garage workspace and my office workspace are shared spaces. I share this office with my partner. He also has a sit-stand desk, and getting a sit-stand desk was something that we had planned for pre-pandemic, and then it became increasingly difficult to find one after the pandemic had already started. But we managed to get a couple of them, and that's been really helpful for the both of us. My partner, as I mentioned, did used to use the one of the monitors that's behind me as part of his initial computer setup, and actually his main desktop computer is now in the basement with our projector setup. That's how we run media through it, is it's just the projector is connected to his old desktop, so we can do gaming through it, we can run Netflix through it, we can watch not necessarily the most legally acquired movies through it, and other things like YouTube as well. So on his desk setup though, we have his microphone, his laptop, he's got some other various equipment here. He's got his own drawing tablet for being able to help explain different types of math things, and that's about as specific as I'm possibly going to be able to get. And sometimes whenever you're explaining math, it's a little easier to just be able to draw it. He's also got a vintage radio that he found while we were antiquing a while back, and it works really nicely. And he's got a scanner, because we found that we actually need a lot of scanning done recently. So this is kind of his main desk area setup. He's got the same headphones as me, as I mentioned. And so his desk is a bit more on the sparse side. You can also see that he makes the choice of, even though he has a laptop, he prefers an external mouse with it, and he tends to just use the standard mouse. He's not as much into the trackball mouse as I am, though he does have one of the wireless trackball mouses that you can use the trackball with the thumb, which I'm not personally fond of, and he's just not currently using, because he prefers this kind of mouse. So that's part of our shared space. As you might have been able to tell from my initial walk-in shot, my back is to his back usually, and we just have this shared space between us. And that works out pretty well. We're pretty good at sharing space and having office mates. That is part of the grad student condition in many ways. So it's not like we were underprepared for that. It also makes it a little bit easier because as part of our workflow with us working together involves a variety of and numerous many breaks to exchange memes with one another. So that makes this process quite a bit easier since we are in the same space working together. But also, as I was mentioning, it can make it difficult for handling things like Zoom calls. There's a lot of Zoom calls that we do separately. Whenever it comes to my research meetings that I do, those are usually in the evenings from 6:30 up until usually about 8:30 or 9 p.m. once or twice a week. Lately it's been twice a week because we've got a bit of a deadline we're working up against. And so at those times he might be in here, but it's not so much like a space that he's really doing as much of like any other phone calls in. He might be listening to a podcast or working on a paper or something. Whenever he's in here on a Zoom call for like his research meetings, I'm usually either really quiet or I'm working out in the garage, and we'll trade back and forth on using those spaces like that as auxiliary space to be able to have those conversations. Another thing that's gonna come up tomorrow, and I'll talk a bit more about it then, is we also share his desk space once a week because we co-host a reading group that came out of the tragic events over the summer and the mass resurgence in the discourse around anti-racism. It was something that I professionally and academically have been steeped in for a very long time, but it wasn't necessarily a conversation that my partner and many colleagues in his department, in the math department, really knew how to have or really felt like they had a space in. Until this summer when my partner was like, you know what? I gotta try to make an effort, and I need to know about these things, and I need to know what I can do as a person and as a mathematician and as an educator to create better spaces and to be better. So a lot of that happens with me rolling my chair over and us together working from the same desk and being on a Zoom call together. We've got a headphone jack splitter so that we can both have our headphones plugged into the one computer. And that's where we host our meetings from. Back when we had our one-bedroom apartment and, you know, really small space, we used to do it all from a setup where we had a webcam actually on a tiny tripod, which is actually the tripod I'm currently using for this camera. And we'd have it all hooked up to the TV in our living room slash office slash extended workshop space, also known as the only other room that wasn't our bedroom. And we would just do it from there, sitting on our living room furniture and doing the best that we could to host meetings from there. So now we do it in here, and that works out pretty well. And I do primarily work in here, but I also experience leisure in here. I played Among Us from here for 5 hours a couple weekends ago when Victoria and Chris and all of them invited me to play Among Us with them. I think Elizabeth was there. Some other folks were there. And then some folks who aren't even in our classes were there. So that was a lot of fun. It was my first time playing Among Us. I did not do a great job as the imposter. Well, welcome back from my office and into my basement again. As I was talking about how I use my office space, I originally conceived of it to be more of a just professional space, and I even for about maybe a month managed to actually use that space for just work and not use it as much for a leisure space. Unless if it was what I would consider after hours, and I'm not the greatest person at dealing with things like time. So after hours doesn't necessarily always exist for me, and it's not usually the same time of day as after hours for everybody else, because I like to do things in the middle of the night and I like to sleep in really late, and that doesn't seem to be the schedule everybody else assumes that we have to be on. So that space is a really interesting space for me to re-examine, especially as I was going through the footage that you just saw, and the whole, again, I can't emphasize enough how much other footage there was that wasn't strictly relevant to the topic of this vlog and would have been way too much, but there's a lot that I do in that space and use it for that makes it a really complex room. And I think that the way that I conceive of it as more of a paid workspace as opposed to a leisure space is, I think of it in comparison to what I can do and have done in other parts of my house. So if we even compare it to the next space, which is the garage that I want to talk about, they're in radically different places physically. My office, as I've mentioned, from where I'm at in my house right now, in my basement in the bedroom, my office is directly above me on the first floor of our house. So I have to not only go upstairs, but I have to weave around through the kitchen and our living room to get to my office. There's a bit of separation between us. Oh, geez, I know, the long commute. But to get to my garage, it actually requires a bit more. While technically, I think in some sense, by just steps, the garage is closer to where I'm at right now from my bedroom. I can't just go directly out to my garage. Because when I go outside, I have to put on more clothing than I might otherwise, and that's not to say that I walk upstairs nude. I have roommates and we don't have that kind of roommate agreement. But I could go just upstairs in my pajamas. I wouldn't have to put on shoes. I don't gotta worry about socks. I don't gotta worry about any of that. I don't have to worry about the weather. Whereas if I go out to my garage, especially as it's getting colder outside, but even over the summer when it was really hot, I had to think about the difference in temperature and what I was going to be experiencing while out in the garage. So usually I have to, you know, wear a bit more layers. I have to go out there and prepare the space by turning on my space heater and, you know, bring my coffee out there, bring my breakfast out there if I'm going out there first thing in the morning. And it's a bit more back and forth. And even though it doesn't seem like it should be that much of a difference, it is, because there's a lot more doors, and it's just a very physically different space being outside in the garage, which I think I illustrate pretty well in this next segment of talking about what my garage space is used for and the type of work that it's used for. I talked a bit about it earlier in this video of these different types of labor, thinking about paid labor, recreational labor, and things like leisure and domestic labor. The garage, whenever I was originally putting that space together, I conceived of more so as a recreational and leisure type space. Since I was designing that space with being in the middle of the pandemic in mind, I did design it with the intention to be able to do my more recreational paid labor that I do for PGSG, which I will talk more about as this video goes along, out in that space. And I also conceived of it as a space that I do my other crafts and leisure type work in, that's not necessarily paid, not necessarily professional. It's just a space for me. As I will also explain, the entire garage is not just mine. I share the garage with my 3 other roommates, though really only 2 of them use it. And I think of the 3 of us who do regularly use the garage, it's a bit of a toss-up between myself and my partner of who uses the garage the most. So the garage in many ways has, to my surprise, transformed from what I originally conceived of it as more of a leisure and more of like my artwork type space, to it's also part of my teaching space. I do use it to take Zoom calls out in the garage with students, with classes that I'm in, and with the type of work that I do outside of those 2 main roles that I fulfill as a grad student. So without further ado, let's go to the garage. So as I've mentioned, I'm a grad student and I do classes right now, and I also teach 3 sections, 2 recitation sections, and I'm the main lecturer for 1 course. And I do also, in addition to that, host craft nights for PGSG on campus. With COVID and everything moving online, I have since started teaching more, as opposed to more paint nights, they're just general craft nights online. And I'll show you what that setup looks like later, but starting with my sort of just base setup here in the garage, as this is my art space in addition to a workspace, I'm going to talk through kind of what this space looks like throughout the different types of work that I do. So let's start with up here. I have this tool cabinet that I bought over at Harbor Freight, and it holds a bunch of my art supplies and my robot helmet. And then I've got a bunch of other various art supplies throughout this area. And then I have this lamp, and this lamp actually highlights something that'll be important about the rest of it, which is that it's really movable, and it gets moved a lot. It's just a basic lamp, but it moves a lot, and that's something that's important about this type of workspace for me, is that it's highly adaptable and transformable. Moving then down onto the desk, This is a drafting and architecture desk that I got so that I could adjust the angle of the workspace for whenever I needed to do different types of craft work. Sometimes I have canvases that I paint on that are too large for my mini easel, so I end up tilting this entire workspace for that. Lately I've been mostly doing watercolor, so I don't really need that, and I've been working on canvases that still fit on my easel, so that hasn't been as big of a necessity, but it does come up. Over here to the left side of my desk, I've got my various inks that I work with, and not to be confused with various inks, which are the ink refills of Copic. These are Liquitex acrylic inks that I have, as well as some Deleter comic inks. I use other kinds of aqua inks, and then I've got some Noodler's ink, which is a really nice ink. This in particular one is not a waterproof ink. And then I have an ink mix that I made with a few different colors that I was using a lot of, and then just some ink that I ground myself. I always keep my sketchbook as part of my workplace, so regardless of what I'm working with, I always have my analog art mediums available and visible to me. I do work quite a bit with digital art as well, but I would say that I'm more proficient and more confident in using more analog mediums of art, such as a sketchbook or working with paper and canvas, or even hand sewing. In addition to that, I have just a tried and true basic IKEA clock that's been modified over the years. There was a one term in my community college years that I thought maybe learning German would be a good idea. It was not, because it turns out I'm better at French and I pronounce German words to French. But I have that clock there and I keep it there. It's just a standard analog clock. And then as far as my other major technologies go, I have this Microsoft Surface keyboard that's a Bluetooth keyboard. Once you take the cover off, the little green light comes on and it's connecting. It's already paired to this device, which was actually the first device I bought in order to make doing digital art easier. This is a Lenovo Yoga book, and what's really cool about it is that first off, it has nice magnetic closure, so it doesn't just slap open. But you might be able to see on here the sort of faint ghosting of where the Halo keyboard is on it. But when the Halo keyboard's not on, if you push this option, if you hold down this option up here for the drawing option, there is a stylus pen that goes with this. It's made in partnership with Wacom, and this is the main stylus drawing pen and cap for it, made for Lenovo by Wacom, which is really nice digital art technologies. And so I can then draw on this and take notes on this, and it'll translate the notes up to here. It's a bit of an odd drawing experience being so separated between the two. But I had gotten used to it because I did it for quite a while. Don't mind my very dirty screen. And this has become, since I've switched to my 3-monitor setup, I used this for the last year and a half of my master's, when my other laptop kind of crapped out on me. And this worked really great because I was able to sort of combine interests together, have a highly portable device for taking notes that could really limit the weight in my bag as I was traveling from here to Indianapolis 3 to 5 days a week. And sometimes even further down into Columbus, Indiana, depending on what kind of research I had going on. So it was nice to have something that was very compact in this way. But this works really great for doing all sorts of things on, and it seems to respond better to being out in the garage if I want to do things like digital art, because it just keeps it very cold out here. It's an Android device. There is the option to have the Windows OS on here, but I chose the Android one because it made the most sense with the type of work setup that I had, and I was able to find it for a highly reduced cost on eBay. And at the time, I really was not making a lot of money, and I was spending a whole lot of it on the gas that I had to buy to travel between here in Lafayette and Indianapolis a lot. So this one worked out quite well. Now it's become my garage computer. It works great for that because like I said, I do mostly art out here in this part of the garage. And this also gets used quite a bit to have on whenever I take classes. I'll sometimes do Zoom from this. I also find that not only does it work well for doing Zoom for some of my classes, like I've shown up to this particular class from here before when I was working on a painting with some UFOs in it that I was just really ready to get to the ending of, and I wanted to make sure that I could work on it while paying attention in class and contributing to that conversation. But I've also done this for the other class that I'm in, and I've also taught from out here, because at the same time that I have the option to do a synchronous discussion with my students on Thursdays for those who don't feel like writing a response or just really feel like they want somebody to talk to and want to do their discussion responses for the week live with a human face. It's at the same time that my partner attends a class, and so I let him have the office during that time, and I come out here and I work from out here, and I write down my students' names on a piece of paper for whoever shows up, and we just have a good chat, and it works out really well. You'll see how this particular setup is going to change quite a, not like a huge amount, but quite a bit this evening as we transition from my sort of more general kind of open workspace and cleaned up desk space, and how it'll transform for the setup that I have once my craft night starts, because that setup changes quite a bit and it looks a lot different because there's multi-camera setup going on for that. Like my office inside with my 3-monitor setup, it is a shared workspace. I share this workspace both, well, I mean, I share it with all of my roommates. So it's myself, my partner, and then our 2 roommates who are in a relationship with one another. They're also mathematicians, and they also share the garage space with us and the entire house with us. Primarily the people who are usually out here in the garage are myself, my partner, and our roommate Van. Van's workspace for hers is definitely more of a leisure space is what she works from. Sometimes she'll record the audio for her lectures out here if she's doing an audio lecture. She does mostly teach in person, but there are some times where she has an audio lecture, and so she'll record that out here. And she does a lot more like oil painting and watercolor. This isn't necessarily an art tour, but I figured I would mention since you might be able to see some of her work in the background. And then over here, you can see the other larger, not that that light actually helps, you can see the other larger part of our setup here in the garage that I also make use of, and my partner makes a lot of use of, and he's put a lot of time into curating this space for something that'll work for the both of us and for everyone in the house. As I mentioned, he and I were moving from a 1-bedroom apartment to a much larger shared space, and so there were a lot of things we wanted to be able to do in our tiny space that we just didn't have the means to do. For the longest time, we did all of our sort of woodworking projects from our 2 Dremel that we have. So we've got this Dremel here, and then this Dremel set up here, and other various Dremel attachments that we did the majority of our woodworking from for about a year and a half of living in our very small apartment that we had. Maybe actually it might have even been 2 full years for that. We've got other various power tools, Some of our newest additions would be this particular saw and our band saw. Those have been really great for doing home renovation as well as just general hobbyist type work. And then continuing over here, this desk and these cabinets over here represent actually what used to be the workspace that my partner and I were limited to. And this entire little workspace inhabited a major section of our bedroom. So we used to share our bedroom with our 3D printer and with all of these various electronics equipments and the soldering iron and all of this other stuff. So whenever my partner's brother would come over to work on a robotics project, or whenever we wanted to build various things, we were using our bedroom as a workshop. So it's been a nice upgrade to be able to have this kind of space. It's not something that we could have achieved on our own. We definitely were able to achieve having this space because we had roommates and because we were able to have the support in place from the four of us to make this space happen. And we were really fortunate in that regard, and I'm really grateful for the space that I have to be able to spread out as much as we do. It makes it a lot easier to be in quarantine, which I know is not a privilege and a fortune that many people in town and throughout the United States and throughout the world have with the way that their space is allocated. So I can certainly empathize with those who aren't maliciously being outside of their homes, but are feeling forced outside of their homes because they literally don't have the space to spread out from those who are around them. It was certainly driving me a bit up the walls, because we were from March through the end of June, we were in our one-bedroom apartment for that part of the pandemic, and that was really rough. And my partner and I are fairly good at communicating with one another and doing our best to be respectful of one another's space and trying to be accommodating, but when your physical space is so limited, there's only so much you can do in reality. So it's pretty difficult. But yeah, so that's what the workspace looks like right now by day. We'll see what it looks like by night a little later. So let's look at what my craft night setup looks like. As I had talked about earlier in the video, my usual garage setup, what it looks like, here's how it's been transformed. You'll notice that my computer has stayed in mostly the same location. What's gonna happen here is I will pull up the Zoom link that PGSG has created for this night's event for anybody who's signed up, and myself and staff at PGSG can log into, and what will happen is I will log into both. I will log in to the Zoom both on my shop computer as well as on my phone, which you can see here is set up on my mini tripod. And the camera that I've been filming on this entire time is now set up on my full-size tripod. I went through a couple of different tripod mounts for my phone, and that's because I was trying to determine the best way to be able to hold the mug that we're drawing on mugs tonight, to hold the mug under the camera such that you'd be able to see it without it being up too high for an uncomfortable drawing angle for myself, and such that it could be at a somewhat comfortable drawing angle for me. And so what will happen is that Zoom participants for this event will be able to both see me from this bizarre side angle, as well as see what I am doing through my Zoom camera here, so that they will be able to watch me draw as well as see my face. And this particular event is one that I actually well, not specifically the craft itself, but this kind of event is one that I actually proposed to PGSG over the summer, because I knew that we were going to have to move things virtual, but I also knew that I was somebody who was interested in being able to continue to host these art nights. I will say a portion of my interest is that I do get paid for these, and I do use that money to fund my already probably too large art supply budget. But it brings me joy, so that's what I'm sticking with, damn it. And I also just really enjoy getting to share art with folks. I enjoy getting to talk with folks. I enjoy the type of teaching environment that it is. It's a really different kind of instructional environment than my sort of quote traditional unquote academic teaching space that I have here. It was something that was a really great help in sculpting my style of teaching when I was in my master's at IUPUI. I also taught art classes up here at Purdue for PGSG. And so that really helped form my teaching style. And getting to do it online shows me some of the other ways in which I can do different teaching technologies online. While this may not be the greatest setup for doing this kind of thing. I know Twitch streamers got a million miles worth of legs up on me for this kind of thing. It's the setup that I've got to work with. I have, however, looked up Twitch's recommendations on their website for how to do Twitch streaming for creators. There's been quite a lot of suggestions, and I'm hoping to look into it more over winter break. But anyways, so with the camera setup for my phone, I have two different mounts for it. Because before I got the camera that I've been filming on, I filmed everything on my phone. So all of my spring lectures, all of my summer lectures, all of my early fall lectures, because it really wasn't until I think weeks 4 or 5 that I got this camera, I filmed on my phone. And I had bought the tripod with a cell phone mount, and then I had this tripod that I had bought when I was doing more stop motion work with this tripod mount. And there's a stop motion app that I use on a different older phone of mine that I have since dedicated to just doing stop motion work. It does not function as a phone. I mean, it could if I put a SIM card in it, but it doesn't have one. And so the two different mounts that I have is I have this just sort of standard kind of pressure clamp, like spring mount for my phone, which is the one that I've chosen to use tonight because it has both a screw hookup on the bottom of it so that you could have it up in a landscape orientation, and it has a screw on the back of it so that you can have it pointed straight down. Which I initially laughed at that placement whenever I first got this mount, like way back in fall semester last year. I was like, oh, this is really weird. And now I am not laughing at it anymore. I am so grateful to have that weird position on the phone mount. It's primo. The other phone mount that I have is the one that actually came with the tripod that y'all are currently situated on, which is just an Amazon Basics tripod. It's a pretty solid tripod. It's similar to those that I used to use in high school. Nothing terribly fancy. Has a screw plate on the bottom of it for cameras, and also came with a cell phone mount. This one has a screw knob on the back so you can get full 360 rotation on your phone. Rather than being a squeeze clamp, it has also a screw control for getting it wide and narrow for various phone types, which makes it a lot more of a universal mount than this one is. And it just screws on to any tripod at the bottom here. I believe you could also just technically screw it to this thing, but I'm not sure why you would. I'm not gonna laugh at it though, because last time I laughed at a weird placement on a screw mount, it turned out I was wrong. So maybe someday I'll figure out what that hole is for. And welcome back from the garage to the basement. And this time we're sticking around in the basement. As I've mentioned multiple times throughout this video, this is my bedroom. This is a just sector of my bedroom and my tiny little houses. And my partner and I share this room. Behind the camera is our bed, and our bathroom and all of that. We have this kind of private area that's separate from the rest of the basement. As you'll see in the rest of the clips remaining whenever I go to talk about our basement, just outside the door from my bedroom is another major living room space. My partner worked really hard to put that space together with a projector, 5.1 surround sound, and a projector screen so that we could do things like play video games, watch movies with our roommates. Right now we're working through all of the movies that Mel Brooks directed, which is less than I actually expected. And we would like to, when we eventually can, actually use it as a space to host those kinds of events for friends. Right now, it's mostly just been for the four of us, and that's been really fun. I've had a really great time with it. And while both of those types of environments seem like they're highly leisure-based environments, a bedroom, generally, we think about that as one of the most leisurely activities a person can do, which is sleeping. And also thinking about an entertainment system like the one that I just described sounds very leisurely and fun, but we do end up using this space for work. And so while when I originally conceived of this space down here and how I might use it whenever I was putting it together and thinking about what it as a space could represent in my life, because yes, I do in fact think about archaeological perspectives about space and power whenever I design my own home and my own living spaces, because I just can't turn that brain off. I thought about this as a great potential for work-life separation, to be able to emphasize something that gets talked a lot about in organizational communication by the likes of Patrice Busnell about work-life balance and what that means to have that kind of separation. As I had sort of started to suspect pre-pandemic, but have really come to internalize as my own observation of the experience, I don't think that that's actually a true dichotomy between work and life. I think that it's a bit absurd to say, well, work is work and it's not part of your life, and life is life, and you do that when you're not working. I think that there's not even a spectrum, but a complicated web of just living. And a lot of it is also, if we really want to take a just super niche perspective here, I think, all of it is some form of work. Whether it's work that's just for myself, whether it's work that's just for the people in my home, whether it's work that's on behalf of my employer at Purdue University for my students, or whether it's work that's societally normative and on behalf of my instructors by doing things for class, like making a vlog of my entire life for a week, and then heavily cutting it down to just be about the stuff that's mostly relevant to our class. Because again, otherwise it would be 4+ hours long, and I did not want to do that to either of us. I don't think that that separation of work and life can really be thought of as they're highly artificial constructs. I've touched on it a bit and mentioned that I didn't want to order this video chronologically as I had originally conceived of, because for myself and the way that I've been perceiving time, not only in general, but even more so during the pandemic, has been highly skewed. For me, what constitutes the start and end of a day is really different than that of many of my colleagues who try to uphold what we would consider here in the US the normative sort of 9-to-5 schedule. You wake up early, you do work during the daylight hours, and then depending on whether it's daylight savings or whatever, you might get some daylight after work, and then the sun goes down, and then you go to bed, and then you do it all over again. Well, that's not how I like to live my life. I like to wake up well after the sun has been up, and I like to get a slow start, and then usually once the sun kind of starts going down is when I start doing the work that I usually do. That's the schedule I prefer to be on, because I can't really go outside or like run errands as easily when it's dark outside, so I may as well get those over with while the sun is still up. And that's something that has been interesting to think about in terms of then just the specific location I'm in with my home. It's been a bit of a challenge to balance whether or not it really makes sense to have these stark divides between, well, upstairs in my office, that's the workspace where I do things that I get paid for. Out in the garage is the space that I do more creative, recreational, leisure, crafting work, and a little bit of labor that I get paid for. And the basement is purely a space of leisure and where I do therapy, because I do teletherapy. And I usually do it from my bedroom. I don't think that having those stark lines makes sense, and I do not believe that it truly reflects how most people live and interact with the spaces that they're in and the technologies that they use to perform work. So with that having been said, I'm going to talk a bit about in these next few segments about how I use my phone and how I start my day off interacting with my phone, and how actually my work day starts as early as when I wake up, because that's when I first check my email, is on my phone while I'm still in bed, before I've even gotten out of bed. Sometimes even before I've taken my antidepressant medication. I take it, which, I don't know, bit of a bold move there. And I had to cut it out a bit, but I will talk about it a bit later at the end of the video. But this is also a space that I spend a lot of time in doing alternative interaction with my work. Like most people have experienced during the pandemic, it's been really hard to cope with anxiety and depression. And for myself, I came into this pandemic grieving a friend who had committed suicide the previous summer, as well as a granddad who had passed away from cancer just a year ago. I came into the pandemic holding that still really heavy on my heart, and I also came in as somebody who was very much in need of trauma therapy for years of not necessarily the most well adapted to PTSD life structure. And that means that that can impact my workspace and the way that I work. And the way that that's come to look in my physical space now with the way that I'm working from home is that means that there are some days where I barely get out of my bed or off of the couch in my living room, and I just answer student emails from my phone while playing Animal Crossing or whatever else on my Switch Lite and watching videos on YouTube, because I can't bear to bring myself up to the space upstairs that I have deemed a space where I do work. And I can't 100% say for sure, but it does feel a lot like to me that whenever I do have that response, that it is related to this ingrained social norm of when you come to work or when you come to class, you leave yourself at the door. And I think I've carried that into my home space, and I want to try to reimagine what this entire space can be for me as I move into spring, where, again, pretty much everything I'm doing is still going to be online, except for one class. And I need to be able to work that out for me. But for now, let's talk about some of the things that I've done in my basement space, my interactions with technology that I shared in my vlog footage from that week of vlogging my life, by starting off with talking about bedroom. How I start my mornings.
At least for our space, we have a pretty good work-life separation and a robot, which I really enjoy. Initially, we had hoped for the bedroom upstairs, just for sunlight reasons, though we do get some pretty good sunlight here in the basement, enough so that I can actually propagate some plants, and my carnivorous plants are happy. Initially, we were hoping for that upstairs bedroom just for the more sunlight, but honestly, I find, especially with working from home, that this gives me some really great work-life separation. I've been pretty successful so far about not taking my work into my bedroom. I do still answer my emails from bed sometimes, because sometimes I'm just too depressed or anxious to get out of my bed, but I'm also too anxious to not check my emails. So I do sometimes do that in here. But generally, I try not to do any work from my bedroom, so that's made it a really separate space. I have done some work from the living room, like I've done some Zoom calls using the projector and a webcam that we have somewhere that I have no idea where it's ended up. And I've done some with bringing the garage laptop indoors to do some stuff in here. And I've taken some Zoom calls from my phone down here. And that's about, it. Mostly we don't do a whole lot of formal work down here in the basement. We do attend the Pursuing Racial Justice lectures down here, and we've done some of our reading group meetings down here, and some Zoom calls with Alden's family down here. But primarily it's just an entertainment. Usually whenever I wake up in the morning, some of the first things that I do is I will check my email on my phone. I have 3 different email accounts, and I don't always check all 3 of them first thing in the morning, but I definitely check my 2 more personal email accounts. My personal email account, and then my personal professional email account. I check both of those. And then I'll check what's in my YouTube subscriptions. And then I also check my Instagram whenever I wake up in the morning. I don't 100% of the time check my Instagram first thing. So this is my phone. It's a Motorola phone. It's got this case that's magnetically attached to the back of it. It's got a little pocket here for my student ID card, which is what I usually keep in it. And it's got thumbprint recognition, but you can see here on my phone what I have going on is on the main home screen of my phone, I keep my calendar in sort of a running fashion, so I can see kind of what's coming up. All the stuff that's in gray is stuff that my partner does, so that we can best keep track of what's going on with each other's schedules. Then I have things like my email, which this is my personal professional email, as well as just my personal email for all of those weird subscriptions that I have. So those are in there, my 2 different Gmail accounts. Then I have over here my Discord, Spotify, Insight Timer, which is actually a meditation app. I don't use it as often as I maybe could, but it is pretty helpful if I just have too much going on in my head to just listen to somebody else guiding me through different ways of sitting and thinking about other things. Then I have Frog Weather, which is my favorite weather app. It's basically just Google Weather, but there's this frog involved. He doesn't really show up in the evenings, but usually up here there's a picture of the frog doing different things. And during COVID, they updated the images so that anytime the frog was outside, he'd have a mask on, which was really cute. And then this is the little shortcut to the app that opens and closes our curtains. My partner and I built and programmed our own automatic timed curtains. So like I made the page by learning a little bit of HTML and just working with it. So like I can open the curtains, they're already open. I could close the curtains. You can stop it midway through opening or closing if you needed to. And then we have it to where they're set to open at 8:30 a.m. and set to close at 7:30 p.m. So there's just those automatic timers, and then you have to click submit to make it go. But yeah, so I made these little buttons in here for this website that just goes to our local IP address. And yeah, it works pretty great. It's a nice way to wake up in the morning with the curtains just automatically opening, especially since we use blackout curtains. Then I have my photos here, and I reference that actually pretty frequently because I take a lot of different photos for different projects that I do. Also, I do some pictures of plants whenever I'm out on walks and hikes that I really enjoy. I take a lot of pictures of my own art that I do, and I also take my own sort of outfit photography, basically selfies. For my clock. Phone alarms are an essential part of my work day while working from home. You've got my 9 a.m. alarm, which only goes off on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Same with a 9:30 a.m. alarm that goes off on the same days because I sometimes wake up at 9, but usually end up waking up at 9:30. I've got a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Well, this Saturday I woke up at 10 a.m. I probably won't wake up at 10 a.m. this coming Saturday. And then you see these two just kind of random alarms here, and I'm actually about to adjust this alarm to not be 3 p.m., but to be about 3:45 p.m. because I'm gonna take a nap. And then hopefully be able to start my evening, and as has been pretty normal lately, I'll be probably working in the nighttime as opposed to during the daytime because I like working at night. I got my calculator, which gets used pretty frequently. Down here we've got, obviously the main apps, things like Google Chrome here for my browser. And this, if I go into here, automatically has it to where if I go to the Purdue email, it's already logged in, which is a dangerous thing to have on my phone. I really try not to do email from my phone, but there are sometimes whenever my anxiety is high enough that I just trying to avoid it stresses me out more than just constantly checking it. Then on the next page on my phone, I've got a couple of notepads that have these cute little dogs as food images. These notes don't necessarily have anything that I necessarily need the information for. It's just I've randomly stored information there. Let's see, I have a couple of Patreon subscriptions that I maintain. The shop one lets me know whenever I get, for tracking all of my deliveries in one place, which is kind of useful. Venmo, YouTube, which I do frequently from my phone. I've tried to stop doing that, but I don't know. I like using YouTube on my phone. And then my Instagram as well. And then on the last one, I have WhatsApp sitting there, and I just recently started using WhatsApp because there's a team that I collaborate with over at PGSG, and they primarily use WhatsApp. So in order to coordinate the craft night events that I do for them, we use a combination of messaging via WhatsApp as well as email. But yeah, so that's kind of the general stuff I use on my phone. I'd say on a daily basis I use almost all of these apps. I don't really reference the curtains one as much, and I don't necessarily meditate every day, but all the other apps I definitely get daily use out of. Not as much WhatsApp either, just because we don't need to collaborate constantly. So yeah, that's kind of the general use of my phone.
After going through all of this footage and going through all of the footage that you didn't see and all the footage that you did see and trying to process a semester's worth of trying to, I guess the more positive adjective would be innovate my work life, to work from home and to, something about grit, boiling down, boiler up, I don't know. Some kind of weird, toxic narrative that our employer likes to perpetuate. And after trying to rationalize different narratives and different perspectives, both from within myself, from within people who I was close to, and from within the context of what my employer was trying to tell me made sense, and comparing the response and messaging from the state of Indiana to what I was hearing from my mom and what she was hearing from state offices in Washington state, and all these just vicious and contradictory ideas about what it means to be alive during a pandemic here in the United States. It still is a lot to process. I want to be able to conclude this video with some coherent thoughts, and I don't 100% know if I can give you that. I certainly can't give you any solid conclusions, and I can't give you a nice, businessy, professional, scientific, whatever, research outcome here. But what I can give you are my thoughts on some of the positives and negatives, or I guess limits and merits of my current work environment. My thoughts on how my work environment, as its own small context, is contextualized within the community that I live in, and some of the differences based in what I'm experiencing and what I'm hearing from those around me are experiencing. And I can share my thoughts on what I and what we could be doing as we move forward. So starting with sort of the positives and negatives, and they're very enmeshed within one another. I would say some of the positives have been that, one, I have a lot more control over my sleep schedule now than I ever did. Like I had a little bit of control in scheduling when I was on campus more, but I have even more control over it now, which is great. Second, I really appreciate that getting to work from home for somebody who deals with various types of mental health related disabilities. I get to have a space where if in the middle of the day things aren't going well for me, or even in the middle of a Zoom session, I just all of a sudden feel myself just melt out of my own skin, I can have more of an opportunity to just sort of turn off. With a Zoom call, if I'm not really feeling it, or if something just gets to me and I need to be able to process it without having people looking at me, I can turn my camera off. And I've had instructors this semester who have been really okay with that. They haven't been critical of that at all, which has been really fantastic. And I'm able to extend that same opportunity to my students when they, for those who do come to meet with me synchronously once a week, I've been able to extend that opportunity to them as well, which has been really fantastic. I also can do that in other ways of, as I explained, I can work from bed, because sometimes between, you know, a few emails or a little bit of grading here and there, you just need to cry for 30 to 90 minutes. At least I do, and I can. And that's been really helpful. I'm able to have the space that I need to do things like start trauma therapy. It's hard to start it now, and it is hard to continue going through and trying to do my job while I'm going through with it, but one advantage of our current circumstances because of the pandemic is that it got a whole lot easier being able to not only do trauma therapy from the comfort of my own home while still on a video call with my therapist, but also that the majority of therapy isn't actually in the session, it's outside of the session. It's how you process the session, how you're processing things leading up to and outside of, you know, after the session, the different emotions that are going on, the different practices that you take to try to make it, to try to make improvements that, you know, you set goals for yourself if that's what you're working on. And that can be really hard to do, and it can be really easy to ignore those, the benefits and the behaviors that you want to engage in, because there's a lot to control for in the environment outside of that whenever you have to go into a classroom and stand in front of an audience of students for anywhere from 50 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes at a time or longer, and try not to cry in front of them. I can usually keep it together pretty well, but I noticed a stark difference between how I was able to cope with some of what I was going through this semester as compared to a year ago fall semester of 2019, when the morning that I found out my granddad had been confirmed dead, I still went in to go teach because it was too soon for me to find somebody to cover me, and I just wanted to see my students. And I made it through most of the way, but because I wanted to be transparent with my students and let them know what was going on and that it may cause some last minute alterations in what would be happening in the next couple of weeks after that day, I ended up crying in front of my students, and they were all very kind about it. They were all sent very nice emails. Nobody said anything horrible about me or about it in my, end of semester evaluations, which was fantastic. But after I did that, I then had to go and explain to half a dozen people of, hey, I'm leaving right now from campus, and then I had to walk all the way from campus to where my previous apartment was to get home so that I could cope with what was going on. Whereas the space I have now, I can just be home. And I can do things for a few hours, like whatever meeting I have, and then I'm at home afterwards, immediately. And it's not a whole production to have to do anything. So that has been really nice. And I know we've talked a bit about that in class, where for years, people with various disabilities or limited abilities, or diverse abilities, there's a few different a few different ways that people use terminology for that. I personally, as somebody who lives with it, am fine with using the term disability. Folks with various disabilities for years have been asking for accommodations to be able to work from home, and they've been told, as we've talked about in class, they've been told that it would be too much of an inconvenience, or that it just wouldn't work out, or that there was no way to make it happen. But then when everybody was forced into it because of something that affected everybody, suddenly we're able to let people work from home. We're able to have more classes be taught online. We're able to allow for flexibility in scheduling and grading. Suddenly, there's not as many points associated with classes, and not as many stupid assignments that are useless and just invented to be punitive for some reason. There's not as much of that now, when it affects everybody. But when folks like myself were asking for, hey, maybe there's ways we could shape this to be a better system, to be better accommodating for folks like myself, who I can do the work and I can be a part of it, but I really need it to be a less overtly hostile environment. I don't know why it took so much to get that. I don't think it needed to. But yet, apparently, it did. It did take a global pandemic to prove, oh hey, yeah, we actually can accommodate people in a way that not only allows them to work, but also allows them to be at home in an environment that is better suited to their working needs. And not just environmentally, but time schedule wise, support wise, and all that. So it's been really positive in that aspect, because I've been able to have that accommodation without having to ask a whole bunch of people for accommodation, without having to explain why that accommodation makes sense, without having to try to get some work around and adapting and all that. I don't have to put as much effort in, because this is just how it is. So that's taken a lot of pressure off of me. Now, thinking about some of the negatives of this type of working environment, specific to the fact that it's a pandemic, and specific to the Protect Purdue plan, yeah, PPP, the piss poor plan. The Office of the Dean of Students, every time a student is instructed to quarantine and they're one of your students, as I'm sure you've observed throughout the semester, you get an email. You get an email every time telling you what student it is, that they've been instructed to quarantine, even their entire class list, but you don't get told what's going on. And so for someone like me, who I genuinely do care about my students and I want the best for them, and I view our teaching relationship more as a mentoring relationship than anything else, I get scared that they're going through the worst of it, and I don't know. I have no idea. And I was advised to not email my students every time I got a quarantine notification, because there's privacy concerns there and they don't technically have to tell me anything, and I shouldn't be hounding them for that information. Which makes sense. And given the fact that every week, even through after the week after Thanksgiving, I got at least one, but usually somewhere between 2 and 4 quarantine notifications a week. I was perpetually terrified both to open my email and to not be constantly checking my email to see when I got that quarantine notification. I had a few who were repeats, but in total I got over 30 emails throughout the course of the semester about students, and over 25 of those were unique notifications, meaning that it wasn't that they not including, repeats. And what was the most disheartening aspect of it was to see both this narrative that instructors and faculty are trying to be more accommodating and kind to students during this time, but then to also hear from fellow colleagues whenever I'd say, man, I keep getting all these students with quarantine. Over a third of my students in total have gone through quarantine. I just feel so terrible and disheartened, and I'm scared for them. They're having their hand forced by a system that doesn't protect them, and I can't do anything to help them. I feel so terrible, and the majority of the time the response that I got was, well, they were probably being irresponsible, serves them right. No. People don't just get to morally get to have COVID because they were being irresponsible, and we don't get to assume that they were being irresponsible. You can't assume any of that, and why assume the worst? In addition to other types of negligence and negative messaging and propaganda that came out of our administration and out of Mitch Daniels' face throughout this semester, really put me in an uncomfortable position as I was acting as an agent of the institution while working from home and feeling like I shouldn't be a part of it, because no matter what I did, there was nothing I could do. I did as much as I could, but my students still got sick. I fought to make my classes that I taught online. I did everything I could to try to make sure that what they were doing in my class could feasibly be done in a manner that not only got them the information that they need and achieved our learning goals, but also didn't violate any of the social distancing or safety precautions or mentally tax them more than was absolutely necessary for being in crisis education. And they were still getting sick. And so at a certain point I had a breakdown, and I didn't know what to do, and I still don't really know what to do. I don't really have the choice to leave my job because I don't agree with the politics of my employer, and I don't agree with the way that my employer is doing things. I'm not in a financial position to do that. And if I left, I would lose my insurance, which means I would lose out on the mental health care that I really need access to as somebody who's coping with and trying to learn to live with PTSD. And somebody who deals with regular insomnia. I would lose that. I would lose the ability to afford my medication so that I can cope with what's happening around me. And that's not a choice that I can afford in any sense. So I think that one of the biggest negatives of working from home has been just the overwhelming, disheartening despair of the disconnect between how I conceive of it and how my employer conceives of it and how various members of my community conceive of it. That's been some of the biggest negatives to deal with, and I wish that that wasn't the case. I think when I consider all of that, and it feels like the entire world is crushing in around me, I also then remember that I have neighbors who I've met at a distance, who I know who have to go into work. They go into factory jobs, they go into local medical facilities to work, and they don't have a choice to be able to work from home. And even in houses that aren't as close to mine, but a bit further down the street, I know folks who are working in retail who have to work in order to be able to afford their bills. I've on our Nextdoor app for our neighborhood, I've heard of people who have lost their jobs because of COVID, and they're having a hell of a time getting on unemployment. I know some small business owners in the area who have had to since close up their shops and can't get the support that they need, and working from home isn't an option for them. And so I'm incredibly privileged to be able to work from home. And I'm incredibly privileged to be in a position to be able to complain about the negatives that I am experiencing, and to have access to the technologies that I do, and to be able to use them in the most advantageous ways that I can. I think it's not necessarily something that means that both of our situations can't suck and that there aren't larger systems in place, because there are larger systems in place that literally exist, known as the state of Indiana, that are causing these problems for all of us. And I think that what I would say about having perspective and contextualizing my experience within the larger community, and recognizing that my experience within the larger community is a much more privileged one in terms of my ability to remain safe during a pandemic, is that it means that it would be inappropriate for me to go around saying, oh, I have absolutely the worst life, and it's terrible. And I don't think that that's necessarily appropriate for anybody to be saying. And it means that I can make small decisions in my community to try to help my community out, because I am in a position to be able to do so, since I'm able to maintain a high level of social distancing and isolation from others. I then can help people in my community who do need help and who aren't able to get the amenities that they need. I'm able to help folks out around me who need extra money to get gas because the buses aren't running as much as they need them to be, or because they can't get their car fixed because they have to spend all of their money on other things that the pandemic has caused as far as expenses go. I'm able to provide social support for people in my community who I otherwise would not be able to provide that kind of support for, because I would have literally no time to do it. I'm able to do that. One of my privileges is time. Being able to give my time to those around me. And something that I did over the summer to be able to lean into and recognize that privilege was I had some furniture that I didn't need whenever I moved, because it just didn't make sense for this space, and we just had excess between the four of us. And rather than selling it, which is something that I would have normally done to get extra cash as a grad student, I recognized the position that I was in a privileged position to still have a job, to still have gainful employment, to be able to afford what I had, that I was able to just give my furniture directly to people who needed it, to people who found themselves suddenly with more people in their home than they had before, and needing extra furniture to accommodate them. And that was a decision that I made in recognition of the privileged position that I was in. And it's those kinds of decisions that I am able to continue making. I'm able to continue making the decision when I'm at the grocery store. I can change my budget a bit so that I'm not buying a bunch of necessarily the least expensive of the items on the shelves, because I know I've heard from people in the community via the different sort of community organizing groups that I've been a part of, where they've gone to the store to get things off the shelves and literally the only thing on the shelf was the most expensive version of that particular item that they needed, and they couldn't afford it, so they had to go without. And hearing those kinds of stories have made me change my shopping habits, where I'm like, okay, I know I can afford the more, medium priced to a little bit more expensive items on the shelf, so that when somebody comes in who can't afford the more expensive version that's marked up for some kind of fucking capitalist bullshit reason, and they can't afford that, then hopefully maybe it'll be more likely for that item to be available to them. It's a small effort that I as an individual can make, and I have no measurable way to check if it's actually helping, but I hope it is. And I think that thinking about that in terms of then transitioning to considering how do we take the way that we're living now and transition it to life after the pandemic, there's a lot of unknowns. I think the first major infrastructural thing is being a lot better with accommodations. Maybe we could, and I say maybe in a sarcastic sense because I'm a facetious asshole, and maybe we could stop telling people with disabilities who ask for accommodations, such as being able to work from home either part or all of the week. We could actually let them do that. We could actually make that accommodation more accessible and less stigmatized. That would be great. We could also raise the minimum wage so that people who are working these essential jobs that we're so grateful for, and in big cities we stand out on our balconies and clap for them as they come home after we've belligerently yelled at them because we're still entitled pricks. We could actually try paying them a living wage. We could raise the minimum wage to an actual living wage for the area that they're in. We could try doing things like lowering the rent, because as has been said by previous candidates who have run for president, the rent is too damn high. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name right now. We could make the rent less damn high. We could make it so that food is less expensive. We could, I don't know, overthrow capitalism. Some ideas. For myself, individually, what I can do moving forward is, and in particular going into spring semester, is I can try to relax a little bit, which is a hard thing to tell myself, but I think what I can do is I can work on accepting that I don't need these hard boundaries between the spaces that I work in, and I can better adapt to thinking about the space and my emotion, and as they collide together, being able to meet needs. These are spaces of needs, not as much spaces of specific narratives that I've formulated. I don't need to make a narrative and stick to it for how those spaces are. I just need to be able to use them to survive, to earn the money that I need to pay my bills. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my vlog. Like and subscribe. Just kidding. I'm not going to take up vlogging, so don't worry about subscribing. You can like the video if you'd like. It is unlisted, so it's not going to do a whole lot, but if you want to like, you can. And thanks for watching the week in my life with technology. Bye.
Also, did they not think that they could maybe rename the Cisco spam quarantine emails? Because, especially for somebody like me who's getting multiple emails a week about students instructed to quarantine, I really don't need any other emails that are labeled quarantine. It's obnoxious and a bit insensitive, and if they could stop doing that, that would be great. Also, that is the most obnoxious vlogging thing I've ever done. Yay me!